Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
And the way that we do that is by implementing these in our marketing strategy, these long-term nurture pieces where we're nurturing them. And then at different points that make sense for them, we're sending them offers that make sense to them and just inviting them to purchase again, inviting them to purchase again. I don't know really why, because a lot of these smaller operations, they're not looking at their marketing scorecard. They're not maybe so tight on their systems and watching the budget and all those things. Oftentimes the big question is sort of like, okay, we need to reverse engineer, like really understanding what's going on and what's working, what's not working. Because oftentimes the business becomes attractive for the sale because there's like this one person that's really, the 80-20 rule, right? That one person getting 80 of the stuff, 80% of the results. And I can tell you that your brand is not just your color and logo, your logo and your colors. And even, it's not even just your mission and vision and value. I think it's incredibly important to go through that exercise. And if you're a person that feels not like a process you can do on your own, getting someone to sort of being a sounding board, someone with more experience, really valuable. And that doesn't have to cost a lot of money.
Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. Sponsored by DoDilio. Looking to buy or sell a business? Assembling the right team is essential for success, and that's where DoDilio comes in. DoDilio is the go-to platform for hiring top M&A service providers, including attorneys, deal advisors, and due diligence experts. With a network of over 250 highly vetted professionals and boutique firms, they connect you with the expert you need for a seamless M&A journey. Whether you're acquiring your first business, growing your portfolio, or preparing for a sale, DoDilio makes building your deal team easy and efficient. And best of all, their matching service is completely free. Visit DoDilio.com and assemble your winning team today. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Victoria Hajjar, and she is the CEO founder of Ugli Ventures. And of all the things we usually talk about buying and selling companies, we're going to spend some time today on marketing. What do you do when you buy it? How do you grow it? That type of stuff. How do you create that marketing system that will be good for the next buyer? Those type of things. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited. We're going to geek out on some marketing. We've got two marketers here, so I think it's going to be a really good conversation.
For those of you guys that haven't picked it up yet, you listen to the show all this time. I'm always talking about buying and selling companies. My background, my MBA is in marketing. I was a coach for J. Conrad and Livingston for a little while in his guerrilla marketing system. And, I did a lot of marketing for all of our businesses I've ever owned. So, this is something I'll be able to geek out on and have fun with. So, those of you guys are like, what is this, tech nerd / computer guy doing, talking, and real estate guy talking about marketing. As funny as I got burned out on tech and I went to get my MBA in tech management, and halfway through it, I switched it to marketing. So that's how I got started, because that's where all the pretty girls were. But it's funny as I did meet my wife while I was in that program. I met her at a different place during that program. But so I love marketing. I love this concept. You've been doing it for quite a while. Why don't you give everybody your kind of your origin story. How did you got into the space and a little bit of your background before we get
Yeah.
started?
Yeah. Well, I didn't go to school for marketing. I kind of fell into it. I, went to school in New York and sort of had this come to Jesus moment. I grew up in the tri-state area where, I was working for corporate. I was actually working for the A&E, which is the History Channel and the Biography Channel. That was
Yeah.
kind of like my path. Worked for Dog the Bounty Hunter. Do you remember that show?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a trend. So I worked there for a couple of years and kind of had that cubicle moment, which I think you can obviously relate to, knowing a little bit about your life, where I kind of was sitting there and I was like, I get out of here. And I sort of fled the country. I ended up moving to China to teach English, actually. But what I learned very quickly is that I really was not a teacher of English. I didn't love it. And I kind of fell backwards into, working with real estate developers. So this is kind of a place where we cross over a bit. So I, worked with hospitality developers and in China, and that was my first exposure to, real entrepreneurs and, investors and that whole world. And I remember when I first met them, I was so impressed, that they had raised, X amount of, millions of dollars to do their projects. And I never really known that was a thing, right? I was just out of college and I was like, wow. And so someone just gave you all this money to do this. It was wild. So through them, that was my, education into this thing called entrepreneurship. And they, I remember they would sneak me into their EO meetings and I just devoured, the scaling up book and all of that good stuff. And that really, I fell in love with entrepreneurship then. And for them, I started working in marketing, but I was, I didn't know much. So they were really good marketers themselves. So I learned from them and I worked up from marketing assistant to marketing manager. And by the time I was done working with them, about 6 or so years later, I was, running the marketing director for several of their properties. We developed brands. It was really cool. But that taste sort of made me really hungry for just finding higher and higher profile founders to work with. So subsequently, I was just always having my eye out for, exited founders that I could work with or founders that have built unicorn status companies. And that's what I did for the past, 10 years afterwards, was just sharpening my skills as a marketer, or I would call it like a trial by fire kind of education. Because I was always working with these high profile situations with, a lot of times being accountable to the stakeholders and investors. And I had to learn, how to interpret the data, how to present the data, get really quick and good with my numbers, develop the creative side, learn how to manage teams, learn how to grow marketing departments. So that's been really my specialty, different than just marketing consultants. My specialty is really how do you build a profitable marketing program? And that includes much more than just the strategy, right? It's about the team that you get on board, how you manage the team, how you lead them, and how you grow the team to kind of grow with the business. So that's sort of where I'm starting from. And since then, it's just been a wild ride. I've gotten to get inside of a lot of people's businesses.
Have you ever rode the ride through the transition process, through an exit where you were working with a founder, they sold the company and you got to go through that process at all, or?
Unfortunately, I have not been through an exit yet, but I have been on the other side of acquisition. So some clients that I've worked with, even clients that I work with now, who have been recently acquired. And so that sort of merging process is a really interesting one, because you have different teams coming together on different ideas, different processes, different systems, different softwares. And it's a time of great uncertainty. So we can talk more about that if you'd like to. Some of the, acquisition marketing is it's just a really interesting situation, which is kind of very different from when you're getting prepared to sell, right? That build up. Oftentimes when you get into that acquisition, your marketing department, it turns into, there's a huge mess for a while.
Yeah, and it's one of the departments that's really usually scared, because anybody acquiring you already has a marketing department, right?
Exactly.
The upper brand has one, so you're an overlap, right? Where an engineering the engineering department is engineering something totally different they feel a lot more secure in their job. The HR and the marketing guys are really concerned because there's an HR and a marketing department. Before, what most people don't get, and a lot of CEOs don't get, is there's unique skills and learned behaviors inside of that marketing department that is as technical and critical as that engineering department. All right. They
Absolutely.
know what works for this brand, and your marketing department as the acquirer may be excellent, maybe one of the best in the world, but it's because they know what works for your current brand, maybe
Yeah.
not so much for the company you're about to buy.
No,
So,
absolutely. And the situation of the situations that I have been in,
mhm.
our company has been the acquirer. And so we're going into these smaller markets because the acquisitions have been sort of the regional play, right? To get into the
Mhm.
regions.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
And there is that I think from the high level perspective, the stakeholders' perspective, you see sort of the smaller, assets you're acquiring as perhaps, right, they may have backward systems, they may not have the right software, but they know their clients, right? They know their clients and they know their market. And so how do you capture a lot of that stuff? And usually in these situations, you're acquiring these smaller companies, right? And they don't have the resources. They don't have the onboard, they don't have things SOP. They don't have things on, their onboarding process are maybe not as clean. And so it's really, you go into this sort of forensic situation where as the head of all of your department heads probably have to go in sort of in this forensic situation and figure out, what do we take and what do we leave, right? What is the valuable stuff here? What pieces of this puzzle are working? And how can we systemize it? How can we organize it so we can execute it from an HQ, for example?
In my personal experience and having interviewed over 300 people, if you're the acquirer out there and you're listening, really take note of this. Don't change anything at all for the first 60 to 90 days. Just
Oh,
watch what's going on. It's so many times I've heard of people who hurt themselves because we bought a company. They only had one guy doing marketing. We have a whole department of 13. That guy didn't want to do things our way, so we let him go. And then next thing you know, well, cool. How did the revenue go? Oh yeah, we're not. That company's doing half what it used to do, right? And that's because, like I said, that person has figured out what's working and what works to get them there. In this particular case, what they did is the new company didn't want anything to do with marketing in traditional sources, local TV and newspapers. They bought a small group of 4 or 5 rest homes in a community that's an older school community in the Tulsa County area where I was from.
Yeah.
And they bought, these, that's how I knew them. And anyway, people still read the newspaper and watch the local news there. Anywhere you have like Tornado Valley, you still kind of pay attention to local news because that tells you when to take cover, right? So where a lot of the bigger cities they've probably been in, nobody has a reason to, still tune into the local news channel. In that town it did. So they were, trying to do mailers and trying to do all the stuff they do in their other places, and it just wasn't working as well. After talking to the guys, like, well, you just cut off the 2 main things that company was using that successfully for years, right? I mean, I don't even watch that much TV, and I remember seeing their ads every single time there was a storm, right?
Exactly.
Because you think about you're old, you're getting older, you're living alone. That's what I explained it to the guy. So you're getting older, you're living alone. Here comes the storm. There's nobody. Your kids aren't in the house anymore to help you get into the basement. There's now that's when those times you think I probably should get somewhere I can meet, get a little help, right?
Yeah.
So on would pop the commercials.
But you bring up a good point, because I think like in my experience, and again, I work in a lot of in professional services, right? Like these sort of acquisitions that I've been a part of that are kind of that national, right, regional play is, oftentimes these smaller guys that are getting bought up, they've got like maybe one sort of rainmaker, right? Salesperson or one kind of rainmaker marketing person that are just killing it. But, oftentimes it's even they don't know really why, because a lot of these smaller operations, they're not looking at their marketing scorecard. They're not maybe so tight on their on their systems and watching the budget and all those things. Oftentimes the big question is sort of like, okay, we need to reverse engineer, like really understanding what's going on and what's working, what's not working. Because oftentimes the business becomes attractive for the sale because there's like this one person that's really, the 80-20 rule, right? That one person's getting 80 of the stuff, 80% of the results. And right, you sit down with them and they can't even really tell you, right?
Yeah, I've seen it. When I had my real estate firm, one of the things we did for a long time we did what's called canvassing. We'd have teams of people go knock on doors, right?
Yeah.
And we bought houses that were either bank owned or in foreclosure in some sort. So somebody's starting to get in a little trouble. Our team would send, some younger people that were willing to go knocking door to door and say, hey, we understand that this house is in trouble. We'd love to help you out. Here's what we can do. We can, if you want to keep the house, we can do X, Y, and Z. It's a free service, and if you decide that you want to sell it, we have investors that'll buy it.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, there were probably 24 people that tried out for that job, and 2 or 3 of them just killed it, and I could never figure out why. I kept trying to mirror it. It was a young lady, fairly attractive young lady, and her older brother, like he was 15 years older than her. And people had answered the door for them. They were very personable. I tried to mirror that. I brought in probably 24 people that I thought would match that kind of, that mentality. And those two would still bring in 6 times the number. Now, they would do the work too. Now, finding somebody, that's tough work going, here's a list of 100 addresses, try to visit them all this week if you can.
Yeah.
And if nobody answers, leave this note on the door.
Yeah.
Right? That was the job. And,
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
That canvassing, I even went to, we because I love the canvassing type of thing, it was working.
Yeah.
I went out and found, we rented some of our houses to canvassers, people, like a whole team that work for like Comcast or one of the things, and that's what they did for the area.
Yeah.
And I would recruit their best guys from. I was like, hey, I know they're paying you like $50 or whatever per close, and you can close 10 of those a week. I'll pay you $1,000 for a house I buy. Go if you want to visit. After you're done, go visit these. Go visit these. And those guys couldn't out. That little team of a brother and younger sister. The younger sister was like 19, 20.
Yeah.
So he was probably closer to 35 or so.
Yeah.
But anyway, they killed it, right?
Yeah.
And you can't figure it out sometimes. Sometimes it's just like there's a certain vibe people have.
Yeah.
I've seen tech companies where we bring in a sales guy, and he killed it the last job, right? He was the top sales guy. He doubled their revenue. Stuff gets there, and he can't sell himself out of a wet paper bag, right?
Well, and again, there's a lot of factors there, right? It could be like, what's your belief in the product? Like, how connected do you feel to the product, right? How connected do you feel to the culture? And all these things are so, they're nuanced things, but they really do affect the overall, right, outcome.
Yeah, I used to tell people, I was a marketing coach for a long time, kind of a little bit different from what you did or doing. But my saying used to be is, the brand is the story that people say when you're not around, right? It's what they envision when they close your eyes, the colors they see, the logo, but it's also the customer experience, the, overall, like if you weren't in the room, what would they tell another company about? When a person, if they did business with you a dozen times, what would they tell them? And that's kind of the brand you built. It's the story that other people tell. It's so hard not to disrupt that in a merger and acquisition deal, because now you have a new operator. They're not going to do the same things the same way, and you're always hoping you're improving, right? When you buy something, but it may not necessarily be so. Not in the eyes of all the customers. The customers are human beings, and human beings are resistant to change.
100%. But again, and when you're the acquirer, what are you looking for? I mean, you need to find efficiencies,
Yeah.
right? You need to find efficiencies because you're usually looking to crank up the heat on whatever, right, you're acquiring, but you also want to improve and grow. And in order for that to be like applicable across different offices and just simply from a software perspective, right? It's like, we got to get everyone on the same system and from a communication perspective. But yeah, I mean, I think that's where I feel like the CEO having really strong transition team, especially for sales and marketing, is imperative because of how different those strategies can be market to market. Like, as you mentioned, right, with Tornado Alley, if they stick me into Tornado Alley, a girl from Jersey, like I wouldn't know, I would have no insights there. Right. So that's where I think, really appreciating even like these non-conventional ways of doing business in these different places, like to really pay attention, right? And don't disregard things. Because as you said, people will come in and say, well, we need the TV spots, or we need the mailers or whatever, because that's what worked in these other places. And we just want to stick with what we know works. But that could also be, could kill the success of that effort, of that strategy in that market.
What parts of marketing do you think drives value in a company? Like if you were to, if I came to you and said, hey, I'm going to sell this company in a year or two, let's get things situated to where my marketing department is attractive to a buyer, or my company's marketing and the image of my company and everything within your realm. What would you think would be the most important things to address?
Yeah. Well, okay. So obviously there's two layers. The first layer, which is probably the most obvious, it doesn't matter which department it is, right? To make sure that you have your systems, right? You're organized, you're systemized. I think one of the biggest fears for buyers, like I work a lot with, one of my like partners is Flippa, which I'm sure you've heard of, right? So
absolutely.
I work a lot with them and just providing content and guidance. And so, one of the things, so they work with the sellers and the buyers. So one of the things on the buyer side, right, that's instilled a lot of fear is the idea that, things will break if the team gets changed out, if you kind of disrupt what's going on. And the only way that you can really assure that buyer that that's not going to happen is by having your shit organized. I don't know if I can curse, right? Organized,
Go ahead.
systemized, and that you can really show the correlation between the strategy you have running and this results, right? And that those strategy results formula is systemized, and from an operational standpoint, you can kind of switch out people. You want to be in a position as a buyer where there's no golden handcuffs, right? It's not like you have to be connected to one particular person that holds the key to the palace. So I would say that, but I guess the next question becomes, how do you get to that point where you have everything organized and systemized? And you're saying, what drives value? I think there's two primary points that drive value in the marketing department. The first is, of course, the brand, right? Oftentimes in a sale or acquisition, you're looking for the brand equity, right? You want to make sure that the brand has value in the marketplace, right? Not only do they have the plethora of leads and contacts, right, in the database, but that those leads and contacts have a relationship to that brand, that there is trust, that there's community. Because when you are acquiring a company that has like a built-in, not just lead list, right? And I think a lot of people get extremely, enchanted by just these large databases, which mean next to nothing unless you have some kind of relationship with those folks and that they have some certain kind of feeling about your brand, right? That you've worked to create a solid brand with the solid foundation, and that you've really worked to nurture and build a relationship with those folks. And we could talk about the frameworks that are used to do that, which I'm sure ones that you'll be very familiar with. But we also can, we can measure that brand affinity. We can measure that community and that trust, right? And depending on the type of business, there's different tools that exist. But that's a really, really important piece of the puzzle when you're buying a business, to decide whether that brand does actually have value or not. And it doesn't, and today's world, that could say, hey, you could have bajillions of followers on social media and folks may be looking at that as an asset. But again, there's a lot of ways to acquire followers that does not involve genuine connections or genuine community, right? So we need to measure those things.
I want to clearly address the term brand because I think I'm very biased in this, and this is one of my own cognitive biases.
Yeah, good.
I honestly think that way too many marketing agencies sell bad marketing without any results in the namespace of branding.
Yeah.
And I honestly think if you're doing less than, say, $5 million of revenue a year, less than $500,000 in EBITDA, you should never be doing anything for the sake of branding in the terms of spending money on marketing agencies and that type of stuff. The branding, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you shouldn't do branding. I'm saying if you're going to pay for advertising and stuff like that, you want driven results. I want to put $1 in and I want to know what I'm getting $1.25 out or $1.05 out, right? Branding, in my mind, is I've got a uniform set of colors. I've got my logo and it looks the same no matter where it's at. My website matches my newsletters, matches the T-shirts that people see. When there's a correlation that people see when they see things.
Yeah.
The customer experience is steady and the same. It's not variable, right? That stuff builds a brand. You can do it without spending tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. Your entire brand, your marketing, dumping it off on what they're calling advertising for the sake of, we're just building your brand. Everybody will know what your logo looks like. I can promise you, I've seen it. I've even tried it. I've bought every bench in an entire city, like a bus bench, and put my real estate logo on it, stuff like that, and it didn't change the number of calls than the ones where I had strategically placed, right? Yeah. I've done that stuff in the sake of, let's just give it a shot, right? And it's detrimental to a lot of these companies that are bootstrapped. They don't have outside funding, and they're raising capital from friends and family and from revenue, from sales.
Yeah.
To go out and spend that kind of money and not know if you're going to get a result.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm coming from the perspective of, again, across my career, I've been a part of zero cost branding projects. Mm-hmm. I've been a part of $100,000 rebrands. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that your brand is not just your color and logo, your logo and your colors. And it's not even just your mission and vision and value. I think it's incredibly important to go through that exercise.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on chumbacasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at chumbacasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's chumbacasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
And if you're a person that feels not like a process you can do on your own, getting someone to sort of being a sounding board, someone with more experience, really valuable. And that doesn't have to cost a lot of money. But what I believe, and in connecting to what you just said previously, the most important thing about your brand, right, is your brand communication strategy. Are you saying the right thing to the right people at the right time, right? Because your brand is like a personification of your business, right? That's like a living piece of your business. And you need to make sure that entity is showing up, at the right time to the right person and saying the right thing. And that's often where the ROI comes into brand, right? Can we show, and the way that we measure that is conversion rates, right? Mm-hmm. Is our brand communication strategy. So the way we're showing up, right? How we physically look, right? How the website looks, how the logo looks, how the copy reads, the way we're physically showing up in the world digitally to our prospects or whatever, even physically, is that driving conversion? And if it is not, it is often, not the product or services that is flawed. It's the way that we're talking about the product and service. And that's actually the thing that most people don't get right. Because it doesn't, like, the marketing strategy is like, what are the actual physical tactics that we're running, as each stage of the client journey, right? And we'll get to that in a second. But none of that stuff's going to work unless you get the brand right. And in that, it's like, what is your company? How does it physically show up? And do we have that communication strategy that's functioning, right?
Yeah, I've learned lessons throughout my career that I hold true and dear now, but in the process of learning them, cost me some good deals. I'll
Why?
give you an example of one.
Yeah.
And I won't say the business name because I don't have their permission. But I interviewed, not interviewed for the podcast, but I talked to business owners in the eye that they were thinking about selling and I was thinking about buying.
Right.
And got down to it, and we start talking about their marketing. What are they doing for marketing? What's working? What's not? And he's like, "Oh, we run some Facebook ads. We do this. None of it really works all the time. It's just hit or miss. We just,
Right.
we got good months and bad months." And he says, "I think the problem I have right now is I want to go do X, Y, and Z." He had a new shiny object. He didn't
Yeah.
think he had the proper product market fit
Yeah.
for the service that he was trying to sell. And he said, "I don't know how to fix that." So what I did is I just went out and started reading all the 2-star and 3-star reviews and figuring out what people were upset about.
Yeah.
And then some of them had decent social media, so I just reached out and said, "Hey, would you give me 5 minutes?" I did. I reached out to 50 or 60 of them and said, "Would you give me 5 minutes? I'd kind of like to know about your experience." And what I learned is he was trying to sell his software and his tools for X, and the people that were actually using it and leaving good reviews were using it for something totally different.
Yes.
So,
And this goes back to brand, right? It goes back to the basics of who are you? Who is your target client? Who's your
mhm,
customer, right? And what problem are you solving? And when you have a problem with product market fit, it's that question. And I think that the reason why that's so insidious, right, is I feel like most business owners, it's very simple, right?
mhm,
And it seems like something that you can, figure out like in 30 minutes, you can kind of think about what problem am I solving, whatever. The reason why it's such a insidious issue for business owners is that it's a simple concept, right? But it's not easy to hit the mark on. And most folk waste a tremendous amount of marketing dollars, i.e. ads that are missing the mark because actually they are not really clear on who they're selling to and what problem they're solving for them. And that's where sort of building out a system, a client journey in a systematic way that you can measure, right, the results at each of these levels is going to give you that feedback you need to iterate and improve, right? And how smart you are, but not everyone thinks about this, right? Let's listen to the customer feedback and really be able to interpret what they're saying and how that relates to our product or service and how we're talking about it, right? And so mentioned before about the customer service, I think that marketing is a tremendous part of customer service. It's not just who's picking up the phone and what are they saying, what are their scripts. Customer service is everything about, the onboarding experience, even like how they're interacting with the product or, the billing experience or, what happens if a payment gets right or, invoicing, all of the stuff that is part of the communication strategy. And we often miss that piece because we're just thinking about the physical person that's answering the phone and what they're saying. But marketing can affect that much, a lot. So
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
in the way that I work with clients and the way that I think about marketing and building the marketing department that I think is really useful for folks on either side of the coin. If you're someone that's looking to sell, what do you need to get together inside your marketing department to get to that organized, systemized place that's going to not only build confidence with the buyer, whoever is looking to buy, but also to have a system in place so you can actually clearly measure ROI, right? Because that's, again, a lot of folks that when they think of selling, they're looking at these things like, oh, this is the size of my database. and this is my follower count, or this is our, pipeline deals, right? But when we structure things in a way that's systemized and organized, and we build a marketing scorecard against a system, we actually can showcase quite easily, right? The channel performance and the ROI of each channel. We can actually see very clearly our efforts and what it garners for us in terms of all of the things that we do in marketing. And I just think quite simply, folks, a lot of businesses, especially smaller businesses, they just don't have they know that that's important, but maybe they don't know exactly how to do it. And so that, this is what I help clients with. But the overarching theme here is, how do we organize and systemize? I look at the marketing department in 4 different kind of areas. First is all about the brand. So do you have that idea of, not just the colors and the logo, but who you're serving, who is your target client? How are you reaching them? What are the problems that you're solving? Do you have a comprehensive, competitive analysis? Do you know what's going on in the market? Do you have sort of your again, messaging matrix tied together that's proven, right? So, here's the pain point. Here's how we solve it. This is the messaging that works. Do you have all of that together in a way that is documented, that you can actually train other people on? That's one thing I would ask everyone that's listening to think about, because oftentimes it's something maybe you did in the beginning when you first started your business and you never worked it again. And that has changed a ton as you start working and things are changing. Make sure you have that tied together and check in with that at least yearly. The next piece is, have you built a systemized marketing growth strategy? And that's, you can call it whatever you want, but I call it the 24/7 marketing flywheel. It's a version of the client journey, right? These 6 stages of sort of turning someone into, a prospect, into not knowing about you and your business and what you do, all the way into, building that relationship, nurturing them, building that sense of community, converting them into paying customers. Do you have that mapped out? And then do you have a system for measuring the success of that strategy? Do you have that in place? And the answer is no. I would definitely take a look at building that out, because again, a lot of folks think a marketing strategy is just like running ads, right? But actually, when you look at building out a full journey, it goes from these kind of disparate tactics that you're running in marketing, where honestly, a lot of, especially the men that I work with, sorry to say, they just focus on the top of the funnel. It's just we just got to get more people into the sales funnel, more people in the sales funnel, but they're actually, and then once those people kind of leave that initial funnel, it's kind of, they kind of forget about them and they just are focused on just more, and missing a huge opportunity of folks that, have had that 1 or 2 touches with their business. How do we build that relationship and build out that community piece, like I said, or that brand loyalty that translates into revenue, that translates into higher LTV, like lifetime value of that client or that customer. So looking at that comprehensively. And then once you've built out that system, really looking at your team and saying, if I want to get to any milestone or any revenue goal, you look at that strategy you have in place and really have to ask yourself, do I have the right people on the bus to execute the strategy? And if you don't know, right, how to measure that, building out a scorecard is going to help you. Because if you say, hey, on the marketing scorecard, we're just not getting, enough leads, or our churn rate's really high, or, we're getting a ton of bad reviews, whatever, that's going to point you in the right direction of where your team may be, deficient.
We had one marketing roll-up where I was a part of. We talked to over 200 plus marketing agencies. Since then, I probably at least talked to over 200 plus small businesses. And I can tell you, and probably count on a single hand, how many of those businesses had a marketing system so attractive that I wanted to acquire the business because of what they did in the marketing. It is very possible. The one that really sticks on my, and even the 200 something marketing agencies, when COVID hit, it destroyed most of those guys because their typical way of marketing was to go to trade shows, bump elbows with people, take them out to fancy dinners, and land new clients, right? Or steal them from go to social events and steal it from the other agencies. They was all elbow to elbow. Didn't work so good during COVID. They were having a hard
Yep.
time.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one of the best ones. And here's a good one. One of the best ones I ever seen. And I evaluated this industry for about 4 months, maybe 6 months afterwards,
Yeah.
and determined it was kind of like blood diamonds. I didn't want to get into it. It's the coffee industry. Coffee industry is pretty dirty. If you really dig into imports and exports and how the farmers are treated and stuff like that, it's a shady industry. And I didn't want to get in a business where I have to travel all the time to make sure my whole supply chain is taken care of.
Yeah.
But what got me into it was a young guy up in like Oregon, Seattle, that area on this coast. He had 7 small kiosks plus, or kiosks or bigger coffee shops.
Okay.
That's what he started with. He started with one and moved around. So some of them were kiosks and some of them were bigger than Starbucks.
Okay.
And his marketing strategy was so thorough that the brand was uniform across all that. He was selling the 7 coffee shops. I wanted the roasting company
Yeah.
because that's where the real money was. So
Right.
he had 7 independent shops and a warehouse somewhere where he roasted all the beans for everything. But he built this subscription-based model based off of all the logos matched, all the stuff matched, and he had a little declarative on his brand. It's love the sip or something like that. Instead of having a question mark, he had an exclamation mark. So he's telling them, love the sip. And, and then it says underneath it, and this is even on the sleeves of his coffee, want more? And he had a little barcode where people could order subscription and get the beans delivered, beans or ground beans delivered to their house.
Yeah.
Then what he would do is he would ask them questions, through a survey type of thing when they would log into the website to order. Find out their birthday, find out different things, maybe their wedding anniversary. Just randomly get good questions.
Yeah.
And every time there was something coming up where that person would have guests at their house, you might figure out through, like, he would hunt down stuff. He had 2 people on his team. Their whole job was on every subscription to go fill out the CRM for that user. Look at their social, look at everything. He'd figure out their anniversary. Anytime he thought somebody would have guests coming over to their house.
Yeah.
He'd even track users who regularly threw house party. Like, he could see on social they threw house events where they're always hosting stuff.
This is next level.
Yeah, he would track all that. Like, who's my social people and who will have people over. And then he would send them sample packages with barcodes on it. So in a letter, and it just simply said, if your guests love the coffee, send them home with a few samples of their own. And he was growing like mad. And he's like, I just wanted the company for, the whole subscription model. He's doing 6 million one year, 7 million another. And he was doing close to doing 8 or 9 the year I was talking to him in subscription coffee grinds, beans, roasted beans.
Yeah.
And I thought that system of just kind of knowing your customer so well that they're going to know when somebody's birthday is coming up or when somebody's anniversary is going to come up, and they're going to send them the regular subscription, but in that you're going to throw in a nice little letter and some sample packages for their guests.
Absolutely.
Right?
And listen, these things, I think, like, these things are not, it's not like rocket science to sit down and think about this sort of stuff. The difference is that no one does. I think that's, and that's like, because many, against the smaller businesses, that I consult for that don't have dedicated marketing folks, right? There's so many people out there, and this is one of my soapbox things I talk about. When you're a business that just outsources everything to an agency, right? You have no one that is owning the marketing strategy inside your business. And listen, if you're a small guy out there and you can't afford, whatever hundreds of whatever K a year salary for a director level, this could be a marketing manager. This could be literally just someone that is growth minded, someone that is going to own the numbers, right? But someone that's inside your business. And too often we kind of acquiesce the strategy to outside consultants and outside folks. I'm such a proponent of building your team when it comes to the marketing, because again, and it doesn't have to be full-time employees. They can be contractors or consultants, but treating them like team. It's going to get into these nuanced things that are going to enhance that customer experience and build that loyalty and that lifetime value. And if you're looking at a company and you're saying, how are we going to double the revenue this year? Oftentimes there's like 2 choices. We can either, get like a shit ton more people in the front door, right? Or we can just sell a lot more to the people that already know, like, and trust us. And that selling more to the people that know, like, and trust us is a a piece that people like often they don't think much about. But it's,
Right.
I mean, the statistics, like how much easier it is, it's something like 20 or 50 times easier to sell someone that is an existing customer than to convert someone that's new. And the way that we do that is by implementing these in our marketing strategy, these long-term nurture pieces where we're nurturing them. And then at different points that make sense for them, we're sending them offers that make sense to them and just inviting them to purchase again, inviting them to purchase again. And again, it's not rocket science, but I have to take the time to think about it, right? And to put the systems in place to make it possible. And it's often not difficult. Like to track people's birthdays and to be sending them personalized promotions is just like a plug-in a CRM. It's not complicated,
I think people are leaning on it a little too much right now.
For sure.
I think you and I need to give people guidance on how it's a brilliant tool, right? Don't get me wrong. I think AI right now on some of these tools set around, if they had a human IQ, I think they sit around 160, 170, somewhere in that range. And most of us are not, right?
Yeah.
So if you ever sit in a room where you know that everybody is about 40 points higher in IQ than you would understand that it's a strategic advantage to have it. Now, the real quick is most people with high IQs are also very awkward socially, right? So understanding how to ask them the right question and how to get value out of their knowledge base is an acquired skill. And I think the same thing plays with AI. One of my favorite books out there is by Dan Sullivan called Who Not How.
Oh,
right?
love it. Yeah.
I love it. And it's changed the way I do things. I outsource all kinds of stuff now. I jokingly say I'd outsource brushing my teeth. I could get somebody to show up at the right time twice a day. That said, there's something to be said about having a BS meter when you're messing with ChatGPT or any of these tools. They're so much better than they were 6 months ago. They still hallucinate. And even worse, they drift, right? So what I mean by drift is you and I were talking about before the show about training it, giving it images, giving it like the difference between a pre-trained experience on one of these tools like ChatGPT and one that you're just trusting the prompt. Even if you pre-train it, there's a thing that it likes to drift away from it over time. So if you have it write sales letters and after the third or fourth one, you'll realize it's losing the voice.
Yeah.
You have to sometimes tell it, no, go back to all the stuff I gave you and stick to the plan.
Yeah.
Right? It wants to get too creative. It's like it's kind of like having a toddler or an 8 or 9-year-old who's really super creative, has an IQ of 170.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I just want to tie this back to what we're talking about with the coffee guy, because one thing that I think is imperative that everyone pays attention to when it comes to marketing and the future of marketing in general is that what AI is doing is, we are now interacting with these tools and they're going to feel hyper personalized. And there's a lot of the software companies that we use, like our CRMs and the marketing world, like, even if we're generating copy or we're doing we're pulling leads and we're doing cold outbound, like the amount of personalization that is possible with AI is something that is going to, I think, in the very near future, be an absolute like given for prospects. Like they're going to expect that any marketing or sales messages to them, table legs is it's going to have context about who they are, and this idea of like, insert here, right? And us as the human need to like put in the personalization. Now there's tools that can look at people's LinkedIn profiles, for example, and see what their latest post was, or look at their Instagram post and see, like you said, or did they host those parties or not? And so we as business owners need to be able to harness this for our businesses, because if not, we'll get left behind. So whether that means tools that we need to purchase or training that we need our team to get on or whatever, but again, our marketing sales messaging and our communication is going to have to feel that personalized to the individual, because that's the market's going to expect that. Now, I think the question is that how do we do that? And how do we leverage these tools effectively?
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
In our businesses and particularly in marketing, right? The obvious use case is, copy. But we can do so much more than just writing copy. But to your point about training, right? We need to make sure that if we're utilizing this technology, that it's trained properly. Actually, I'm asking you a question. What would it, because you have more experience in this than I do in the back end, right? So what is the difference from a back end perspective from a bot that someone is just wielding themselves, like that toddler or that 9 or 10-year-old, versus something that's consciously crafted that's going to give you the best output?
So in my personal experience, I don't think it's possible for us as humans to build anything without impairing it somewhat with our own cognitive biases. So the engineers that have trained these different chatbots you'll notice, and they're trying to fix some of it now, they tend to lean towards the political affiliations and the ideology of the engineers that built it. Grok is trying to avoid that altogether, but it's still a little bit sassy on the Republican side, where ChatGPT is a little bit leaning the other way. I don't think that's healthy in any sense for anybody's brand. I think that in some expense, your brand is a cognitive bias in its own way. It's a way you're trying to instill people to think a certain way about your product, about your service, and about that type of stuff. Oh. And if you don't give the chat a voice on that and say, here's my avatar, here's 15 different uses of my logo, and give it, here is the last 2 PR releases we did. Here's, the last 15 advertisements we did. Stick to this brand voice, stick to this narrative. The same way you would train I onboard my ChatGPT like I would a new employee. As a matter of fact, every time I prompt it like I would a tasking an employee. Your job is to do X, right? I expect, Z is the result. Here's the result I'm looking for. You're hired on to do, and give it a job description. And then I want, these features, I give it as detailed of the output as I can. And then I say, do you have any questions that will help you perform this task? And I promise you, it asks me 10 or 15 questions every time. And sometimes if I don't think it gets it yet, I'll say, I'll answer all those questions. I'll say, did that bring up any more questions? I act like it's an employee. Yeah. Or are you ready to do this task? Yeah. And it'll ask me 1 or 2 questions, right? And then I answer them, and then it does a pretty good job. And then sometimes you still got to go back and kind of like, okay, this looks great, but I want you to change this portion over here. And you have to, I still think, I haven't seen one yet where it doesn't help to have a decent BS meter, right? Yeah. I'm a trained copywriter. I trained under Dan Kennedy. I have a master's degree in marketing. I'll tell you right now that ChatGPT out of the box, untrained, probably writes the equivalent of what you would have to pay a $10,000 or $15,000 copywriter to write. Yeah. But if you wanted to do a $50,000 to $100,000, copywriter job, which is more realistic on a really great piece of copy, you're talking, Dan Kennedy would charge you $100,000 to walk in the room and talk to you about your project. Yeah. So he's one of the best on the planet. But, on average, the good guys, you're looking at, big numbers, 5 to 6 figures to get something done. If you want it to spit out something like that, you need to train it on your brand. You got to train it on previous language that worked, right? You train it on your avatar. You just can't just go and say, hey, write me a sales letter to sell Mickey Mouse stuffed dolls, right? Yeah. That said, I honestly see great results with it, right? I use it on a regular basis. I was telling you beforehand. I actually programmed a complete app using AI. I used AI to write an app that actually uses AI to help people.
Right.
So.
Yeah, so meta. Well, the thing is that I feel like what I have seen in my line of work is that what is most helpful that the average person. So the reason why I think the average person can't, like one entrepreneur that wants to do every function in their business just using chat. Let's look at that use case, which I think we can get pretty close to that happening, right? Because we keep hearing these like bets of, the oligarchs of the tech world saying, pretty soon they'll be the first $1 billion company with less than 10 employees or something like that, right? And that's coming. But I feel like for us to be able to utilize like team members now in our own businesses to do these functions, I can speak to the marketing piece, is that the reason why I can implement this into teams founders that I work with and build kind of a combination of the bots and obviously the humans, because you need a human to own the process, right? You just need someone to be held accountable that's a human being that can also kind of project manage all of this stuff and hold the quality. You can't get rid of that, but you can certainly cut the cost of your department by incredible amounts by utilizing team members, right? That are AI. Now, the difference here is that, when I work with clients, we're building out a whole playbook, and the playbook has a lot of these elements that you mentioned, right? Has the brand piece, has the marketing growth strategy, has the voice and tone, and so being able to utilize experts to understand the frameworks, to understand what are the pieces of the puzzle. And yes, you could ask AI to tell you those things, and you could kind of get to a piece that feels productive. But I think that the shortcut is really hiring the experts to be able to understand what success looks like for a particular tactic or a particular, a department or a particular piece of your business, and getting kind of those guardrails on how things should get done. If you're working and training bots against proven frameworks, I think you're going to have a lot more success.
Absolutely.
And that's sort of, I think, the danger here. I see a lot of people really confident in using AI, but because they don't have this set of frameworks and this kind of like roadmap to follow, that it could actually just get you into more of a shiny object chasing and a little bit more lost than you already are. So that's where I think leveraging experts to help with that piece is really, really useful. Or, again, you can hire consultants and hire folks like us to help in those things, or even be reading books and be able to apply principles from different teachers that have, to do it yourself. But you have to do it from a place of proven framework and a proven strategy.
I find sometimes that it'll spit out so much stuff, and like you said, you get that little bit of overwhelm. One of the things, I treat it like an employee or an advisor. I was like, man, I just sell it. Man, that's a lot. Can we put that into a project timeline or prioritize all the stuff you gave me in order of the greatest impact on what I'm working on, and give me a timeline on what to implement. And I would promise you I don't do all this stuff all the time. But if it gives me a list of 10 or 15 things to do on a particular topic, and I tell it to prioritize, I'll try the first few and see how it goes. That said, it can be overwhelming. You can sit down at a prompter and spend all your day asking questions and watching it spit out huge reports and stuff and not do anything. So
that's where I think one danger a lot of especially small business owners have that are bootstrapped, that are tight on budget. Just like I said, it's dangerous to acquiesce like all of your marketing strategy and your execution out to an agency that really, they don't have like a huge stake in what you're doing and the results, because they know that if they're not performing, maybe they waste 3 months of your time or 6 months or years of your time. They can just move on to the next client, right? Whereas if you have someone that is a team member, someone that's maybe they're tied to performance or compensation, accountability is so, so, so important, especially when it comes to all of it, right? But sales and marketing, right? Did the campaign, ChatGPT can build out the campaign, right? But did it go out? Did it go out? Is the emails being replied? Is the social strategy working? Are people converting on it? Who's showing up on the sales calls? We need someone to be taking ownership over these pieces of our business and make sure, yes, you can use these different tools, but we need to make sure that things are rolling, right? The qualitative data, like, is the quality where it needs to be? And then the quantitative data, like, is this stuff working? And if not, who's going to be the one that implements those changes? It has to be someone that I believe will take responsibility. And I see that there's this idea that maybe, you could just have, a whole company of just AI folk. And maybe one day that will be the case. But where we are now, I think we still need humans to take ownership over the process.
I've got a little project I've been playing with. I can't get quite working yet, but what I've done is I've taken and trained 4 now different AI coaches, like one in total, marketing, copywriting. I put a lot of PDF books into this thing that of great writers and stuff. And the other one is, a great leader type of, scenario. I put a lot of their books inside of there. And my goal was to have like a chat room that acts like a board meeting or a mastermind. Where I throw an idea out, and each one of these AIs, respond, and they see each other's response.
Very
right.
Yeah.
And they just like sitting in the like a real mastermind, but you're the only human in the room. I have not got it working quite yet, but that's one of the toys I've been playing with.
Because you have to kind of have these chats in one space as individual.
Yeah, I was feeding them all through because you can put those things into WhatsApp. So I was trying to feed them all into WhatsApp, and then have the bots listening to each other, and it just keeps getting quirked up a little bit.
That's a really cool idea. That's a really cool idea.
I'm bored. I'm semi-retired. I do this, and like I told you, I created a mental health support app last week. Launching that, I'll hope to bring a little team on, and they'll take care of it and run it. But after it's up and launched, and then I'll go on to doing something else that's interesting to me. So, how do people get a hold of you and work with you? We're at the top of the hour, and I want to respect your time. So,
awesome.
I didn't realize how far we got so far.
Well, this has been super fun. I've loved this conversation. So, definitely, I spend a lot of my time on LinkedIn. That's my preferred platform of choice. So I'm Victoria Hajjar, Hajjar. You can send me a DM if you have a question on anything that we chatted about today. But also my company is called Ugli Ventures. So it's ugly with an I, because business can be ugly sometimes, especially when it comes to sales and marketing. So I've really made it my mission to help founders to create, organize, systemize, strategize their marketing to build what I call a scalable marketing machine. And this idea of building these scalable marketing entities in your business is getting even more exciting with what AI can do. But again, it's about having the systems and frameworks to be able to kind of get that department moving in a way that everyone's, steering the ship in the right direction.
AI will impress me when I can give it my Google Analytics login, my AdSense login, my Facebook ads login, and my LinkedIn ads login, and just tell it, look at all the analytics. You have a budget of $50, run an ad on one of them. Okay, now the budget's $150, run performance tune this. Okay, now the budget's $1,000. And it just does it. That'll impress me. I think hands down the technology is already there. They could look at the statistics, look at 100%. Human psychology, look at all the different stuff and do it. The scare tactic right now is none of these tools will allow you to give it access to stuff like that. Yeah, right? They're concerned with financials and the AI running amok.
Unless you build your own platform that aggregates all of that stuff, and then you're in business. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for inviting me on. This has been really fun.
Yep. So hang out for a few minutes. We'll call that a show, and thank you.
Perfect.
This episode of How to Exit is brought to you by Final Ascent, the boutique M&A firm helping lower middle market business owners achieve their ultimate exit. At Final Ascent, they know selling your business is one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make, and they've been in your shoes. Their team isn't just made of advisors. They're experienced business owners who have successfully navigated their own exits. Final Ascent specializes in preparing businesses for sale, building value, and connecting with a national network of qualified buyers who will compete for your business. They don't take on a client unless they're confident they can sell your business at the current market maximum value. Whether you're ready to sell now or planning for the future, they'll craft a roadmap tailored to your unique goals so that you can walk away with maximum value and a peace of mind. Start your journey today at Final Ascent. That's www.finalascent.com, because your next chapter starts with a successful exit.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.